to contain a surge in coronavirus infections following the devastating explosion in the port of Beirut earlier this month. Daily infections are at record levels with almost 11,000 cases. Green Torbay in Beirut has more details.
Several factors have contributed to the latest spike in the number of infections. One of them is the chaos that followed the explosion in the port of Beirut and the rush to rescue and help that ensued. The lockdown will have severe economic consequences on a country that is already bankrupt. But with the destruction of 3 main hospitals in Beirut in the explosion and only 20 intensive care units still available for corona cases in the country, the authorities here say they are running out of options.
World news from the BBC. Indian officials say a major fire at a hydroelectric power plant in the state of bodies were found as rescue teams tried to reach 3 slain. People are said to have been rescued. Initial reports suggest a short circuit. Talks on their future relations. The EU says the negotiations appear to be going backwards rather than forwards. Britain has left relations, as Nick Kirby reports.
With time rapidly running out to agree a trade deal with Europe before the end of the transition period on the 1st of January, talks are stuck. The EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said he was disappointed while his UK counterpart agreed little progress had been made. The UK team believes an agreement is still possible, but is frustrated that Brussels is holding firm on access to UK fishing waters and an insistence the UK sticks closely to EU state aid rules. Brussels wants London to agree to common standards to avoid the UK having what the EU
has recorded the highest daily rise of coronavirus cases since the beginning of the pandemic. The Health Ministry said there had been 900 new cases, including 13 deaths over a period of 24 hours. The officials say the increase is a result of people returning home from holidays and large gatherings such as weddings. Officials in Somalia's semi-autonomous region say pirates hijacked a Panamanian flagship. They say 6 pirates boarded the small tanker after it developed engine trouble. Another official said the men were linked to a local militia, which serves as a police unit. One report says they were wearing uniforms and they'd robbed the crew. BBC News.
You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Alex Ritson. The Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny remains in a coma after he collapsed on a flight on Thursday. His family believe he was intentionally poisoned, a fate that's apparently befallen many of Vladimir Putin's enemies in the past. They want to take him to Germany to be treated, and they've got an air ambulance waiting to take him there. But hospital staff in the city of Omsk have said they have found no traces of poison in Mr. Navalny's system. Speaking to reporters, Mr. Navalny's wife, Yulia Navalnaya, expressed her frustration.
They refuse to hand over Alexei to be transported. We certainly believe that's been done to make sure that a chemical substance which is in Alexei's body will dissolve. That's why he's not being handed over, to make sure that particles of the substance will dissolve. He's not in good shape.
And she's now appealed directly to President Putin to let her husband be flown abroad for treatment. Our correspondent in Moscow is Sarah Rainsford. She told me Mr. Navalny's family are furious over the hospital's decision.
They're alleging that there's some kind of cover-up. They do believe that he's been poisoned deliberately. They don't believe the doctors when they say they found no traces of any poison. They're suggesting either they've not looked hard enough or that they're hiding information that they're getting. So they want Mr. Navalny to be transported out of Russia as soon as possible. They say that's partly to get proper treatment, better treatment, access to good equipment and good doctors, but also, of course, to get proper toxicology reports, independent ones they say can trust. So they've been responding and reacting very angrily to what's been happened, to the fact they've been denied access to this air ambulance that's standing by now in Omsk, and they say this is all part of a cover-up to hide what's happened to him.
There's been conflicting information about the cause of his illness. What do we know about what has happened to him?
Well, we know he fell very sick very suddenly on board a plane soon after takeoff. We know that he collapsed at the back of that plane. We've seen a video and we've heard his groans of agony. We know that shortly after the plane made an emergency landing, he was already unconscious when he was taken off the plane, and he's been in a coma ever since. Now, the doctor said this morning that his condition had improved slightly, although it was still unstable, and that's why they say he's not fit to travel. As to the cause of it, well, they're saying that so far they haven't found traces of any poison, but they said that theory continue their investigations into what's happened, but they say so far urine and blood samples don't show traces of any poisonous substance. So they're still investigating, they're still trying to figure out. They say they do have a diagnosis, but they haven't revealed it yet.
What has the Kremlin said?
Well, the Kremlin has wished Mr. Navalny well. It concern about whether or not he takes an air ambulance is a decision to be made by the doctors who are treating him. Mr. Peskov, the spokesman for the Kremlin, has said that Mr. Navalny got sick soon after takeoff, so perhaps it's not safe for him to take a flight. He said it's not a political decision, this is all about the doctors on the ground deciding what's safe. And he did say that the German doctors who'd flown in with this air ambulance to Siberia, they had been invited, he said, to the hospital to speak to the doctors treating Mr. Navalny and to see all the information that was available there. So those are things we're waiting to have confirmed from on the ground, but certainly the Kremlin saying there is no political aspect to this, it's all about a medical incident which so far is unexplained.
Briefly, what do the Russian public make of all this?
Well, if they're watching state TV, they won't know anything about it. It's not been covered at all, it's not been mentioned. There's a huge amount of coverage on social media. Mr. Navalny has several YouTube channels. He's very well known through his social media presence, so a quite large number of Russians, I think, will be following this fairly closely.
Sarah Rainsford in Moscow. There's been a defiant call from the Belarusian opposition politician Svetlana Tikhanovskaya for protests against President Alexander Lukashenko to continue. In a news conference from neighbouring Lithuania, she issued a demand for change in Belarus. Here is some of her address, voiced by a translator.
Our common goal is simple. We want what every person in the world is entitled to. A right to live, a right to be safe in the streets, a right not to be imprisoned without a fair trial, and a right to fair, free and transparent elections.
Belarus has been in political crisis after Mr. Lukashenko was re-elected in elections which have been widely dismissed as fraudulent. Mr. Lukashenko has dismissed the allegations, and the authorities in Belarus are questioning two members of the opposition. Our correspondent Jonah Fisher is in Minsk. He told us what more Ms. Tikhanovskaya had to say.
Yeah, this is really Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's attempt to breathe fresh life, fresh momentum into the protest movement here in Minsk. She is, of course, in Lithuania, having fled there last Monday because of fears for her safety. But yes, the key demands you heard there, that the violence stop, that political prisoners be released. They include, of course, Ms. Tikhanovskaya's husband, and that free, fair and transparent elections be held. She warned President Lukashenko in that address, anyone who thinks we are lacking in determination is sorely mistaken. Today, Belarus has woken up. Now that comes ahead of what the opposition is hoping will be a big rally this weekend. You may remember that last Sunday there was an enormous demonstration right here in the centre of Minsk. Several hundred thousand people marched through the centre of Minsk, and I think they will be hoping once again this weekend to get similar numbers out and to boost a demonstration movement here that over the last couple of days has plateaued a little bit.
Jonah, what more do we know about leading opposition members in Belarus being questioned?
Yeah, this is linked to the formation by Ms. Tikhanovskaya of what they call a coordination council, which effectively is a group of writers, journalists, civil society figures, some politicians who are opposition connected, and that has been formed with the stated desire to negotiate a transition of power from President Lukashenko to the opposition. Yesterday, the authorities here came out and said that they were opening a criminal case against this council that that it amounted to an illegal attempt to seize power, and today they're increasing pressure on some of the members of that council by bringing them in for questioning.
Jonah Fisher in Minsk. You're listening to the BBC World Service. Gareth has the headlines.
The wife of the Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny, who's in a coma with possible poisoning, has appealed to President Putin to let her husband be flown abroad for treatment. The Belarusian presidential challenger Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has declared that her compatriots will never accept the current government led by Alexander Lukashenko. The internationally recognized authorities in Libya say they've reached an immediate ceasefire with the rebel leader Khalifa Haftar. And Lebanon has begun 2 weeks of lockdown to try to quell a big spike in coronavirus infections.
Yes, this comes just 2 weeks after a massive explosion at Beirut's port, which devastated the capital and destroyed vital medical facilities. Abdallah Al-Wadat is the country director of the United Nations World Food Programme in Lebanon.
Before the blast of Beirut port, the situation already in Lebanon was really deteriorating in terms of economic, and coupled with the COVID-19, the blast has added to the catastrophe. 3 hospitals have been lost, so the capacity is limited, and the situation it has been difficult.
Our correspondent in Beirut, Karine Torby, told us more about the lockdown.
Most businesses are closed. Some restaurants will remain open, but only for limited hours, and there is no kind of social activities whatsoever that are permitted in the country. Also, there is a curfew imposed from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning. But also, the authorities here are really emphasizing on the fact that people have to really show commitment to this, to wearing masks, to social distancing. Basically, since August 4 till August 18, the overall number of cases doubled. So in a matter of 15 days, the country registered as many numbers as it has been registering since February, when it first detected the first case of coronavirus. So at this rate, the authorities here say things are really spiraling out of any control. Second, it's the fact that many patients had to be admitted at the ICU because of the injuries they sustained because of the blast 2 weeks ago at the port. Third, there are 4 main hospitals in Beirut that were completely damaged, while some of them completely destroyed. So this means you have already less capacity. And one of those 4 hospitals was already the biggest private COVID treatment center.
Karine Torby in Beirut. Pakistan has got public health experts scratching their heads. They thought overcrowded cities would mean COVID-19 deaths in large numbers, but that isn't how things have developed. Cases have fallen faster than even the country's government predicted. But as Pakistan opens up its economy further, there are warnings new spikes could still occur. Secunda Kamani reports.
Diners at a street-side restaurant in Islamabad look relaxed as they enjoy one of their first meals out for months. When a partial lockdown began in March, customers were only allowed to collect food to take away. But now, nearly all of the country's coronavirus restrictions have been lifted, as new cases and deaths have dropped significantly. Dr. Naseem Akhtar has been leading the coronavirus response at one of Islamabad's largest hospitals.
The number of cases who are hospitalized with us, they have dramatically reduced. So many beds are lying vacant. Previously, we used to have no bed available.
So could this country, despite its virus? Per million of the population, Pakistan has had far fewer COVID-19 deaths and cases than the UK and other Western countries. And it seems its major cities have even fared better than those in neighbouring India. That's despite Prime Minister Imran Khan's reluctance to order a strict lockdown.
We still have to be careful about the spread of the virus, but on the other hand, unless we open up our economy, we have millions facing starvation.
But can we trust the data on the impact of coronavirus in Pakistan? Graveyards in major cities have seen significant rises in burials that can't be explained by recorded coronavirus deaths alone. But even accounting for them by international standards, Pakistan's death rate seems low. And whilst testing has been limited, the number of tests which come back positive has also been decreasing. Dr. Rana Jawad Asghar is a leading epidemiologist.
Pakistan has a much younger population. The age group 65 years and above, which is the most vulnerable group for complications of coronavirus. Pakistan has just less than 4% of that population group. And an important factor is how big is the social circle of the population it is infecting. Now, our social circles, how many people we see on a daily basis, is very limited in Pakistan.
There may be less places for social interaction in Pakistan, but mosques, for example, have stayed open. And whilst the decrease in cases did coincide with the introduction of targeted local lockdowns, they haven't been all that strict. There's still much we don't know about the virus, and as Pakistan reopens, with restaurants filling up and domestic tourists surging towards more rural beauty spots, the possibility of new outbreaks is very real.
Secunda Kamani with that report. Human rights officials from the United Nations have met Mali's former president Ibrahim Boubacar Keita and other officials arrested earlier this week after military rebels seized power from the government. A spokesman for the opposition decided by the Malian people. Our West Africa correspondent Chichi Izundu has more.
Ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita was last seen in a televised video broadcast on Tuesday, where he dissolved parliament and resigned after being arrested and taken to the military barracks outside Bamako. The human rights team was given access to Keita and several other officials, although the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, known as MINUSMA, gave no further information on the condition of those being held. Yesterday, West African leaders called for the former president to be reinstated. A rally in support of this week's action is expected to take place in Bamako later today.
Chichi Izundu. Northern and central California remain in the grip of multiple wildfires following a record-breaking heat wave and subsequent thunderstorms. As the newsroom's Jonathan Savage reports, thousands of lives and homes are at risk.
It's a haunting sound, the crackle of wildfire. What you can't see is the burning brush, motor vehicle skeletons silhouetted in orange and black. These are the Santa Cruz Mountains to the south of San Francisco. The fire here is widespread. It is not under control.
The fire is now 40,000 acres. There is still 0% containment on the fire.
Deputy Fire Chief Jonathan Cox outlined the threat.
Currently we have 8,600 structures that are actively threatened by the fire. We believe we have over 20,000 people total that have been evacuated or in the evacuation area of the fire.
They're calling it the CZU Lightning Complex, a reference to the incendiary thunderstorms that set much of the region ablaze. Chris Clark is the Chief Deputy at the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office.
I couldn't stress more the importance of leaving when those orders come out. I really can't. There are people that are unaccounted for, that we are looking to try to determine where they are. And so I stress that because with this fire, you just don't know how things are going to go. If an order goes out, again, it's for a good reason and you need to leave.
California knows all about wildfires. Last year, over 100,000 hectares were affected. This time, more than 60,000 people have been forced from their homes and 4 are known to have died. They include a utility worker helping clear electrical hazards for first responders and the pilot of a firefighting helicopter killed in a crash during a water-dropping mission in Fresno County. Collectively, an area twice the size of New York City has been scorched so far. The effort to silence the outbreak goes on.
Jonathan Savage with other stories from our news desk.
4 family members will face charges in France after beating a teenage girl and shaving her head because of her relationship with a boy of another religion. The 17-year-old's parents, aunt and uncle will be tried for violence against minors later this year. It's alleged the Bosnian Muslim family members reacted when the girl expressed her desire to marry a Christian boy from another Serbian family. The girl has been placed under protection. Total government debt in Britain has for the first time exceeded $2 trillion. The Office for National Statistics says this means that for the first time in 6 decades, the British government owes more than the entire value of the country's economy, as Andrew Walker explains.
The coronavirus and steps taken to contain it have hit the government finances very hard. Spending has increased sharply on programmes such as the furlough scheme intended to preserve jobs. Tax revenue has fallen as people and businesses have earned and spent less. So the government's borrowing needs have increased sharply. The last 4 months have been the 4 highest figures on record. In relation to national income, government debt is now more than 100% for the first time since the early 1960s. Although the figure for borrowing in July is very high, it does represent a substantial decline from the peaks it hit earlier in the pandemic.
Sudan says 72 people have now died in floods caused by torrential rain since late July, and thousands have been left homeless. The country's civil defense organization believes more than 17,000 homes and 129 public buildings have been destroyed. Heavy rains usually fall in Sudan from June to October, and the country faces severe flooding every year. And Sevilla will look to cement their place later as the most successful side in the history of European football's second most prestigious club competition. The Spanish team faces Italians Inter Milan in their 6th Europa League final in 14 years, having won the other 5. Inter, whose last victory in the competition was in 1998, are considered favourites, however, after thrashing Shakhtar Donetsk 5-0 in Monday's semi-final.
Gareth, thank you. Australia's National Science Agency is joining a new commercial venture to feed livestock with a type of seaweed said to cut animal greenhouse gas emissions by more than 80%. The country's science minister called the feed additive an environmental game changer. I got more details from Phil Mercer, who's in Sydney.
This discovery was made quite a long time ago by a farmer in Canada. He noticed that his cattle who were in a field bordered by the sea were more productive than others. They grew faster and were healthier, and Australian researchers eventually got involved and investigated the impact of seaweed. The results, they say, were so impressive that they thought their equipment was broken. So that was quite a few years ago, leading to many that this particular product could be on its way to Australian dairy and beef producers by the middle of next year.
So to put it crudely then, the cows fart less.
Well, therein lies one of the misconceptions, according to Australia's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, the CSIRO. They say that most methane from cows, about 90%, actually comes from burps, the rest from flatulence. What it means is that methane, according to government researchers here, is a greenhouse gas that is 28 times more powerful than carbon dioxide, and it's estimated that 1/5 of all the world's entire greenhouse gases come from livestock production. So the hope is that if this particular product is used by just 10% of the world's beef and dairy producers, it would have the same impact on the climate as taking 50 million cars off the road, or 120 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions a year. So they are pretty significant figures.
Phil Mercer in Sydney. Back to Lebanon for our last story, and pictures of the enormous explosion in Beirut last week found their way around the world in seconds, thanks to social and broadcast media. Among those looking on in helpless horror were members of the Lebanese diaspora. Pop star Mika falls into that category. His response? To put on a benefit concert next month to be streamed live online. Mika told the BBC what he felt when he saw the devastation in Beirut.
Seeing those, quite frankly, apocalyptic explosions on Twitter and on Instagram and circulating everywhere was just kind of horrifying. It brought back so much imagery from all those years of civil war. What made it so much more difficult is that over the past few months, we've all been hearing about how bad the situation was getting in Lebanon. Economically, political strife, poverty levels going up. And so this was really the last thing anyone expected. And of course, there were so many conspiracies going around as to what it possibly possibly could be. Now we have more of a sense of what it was, and still confused about how exactly it was allowed to happen. But it's quite devastating. It really just this rush of sadness that went around the world. And so many people remember how much suffering happened during that civil war, and it just brought it all back. There is that unifying factor that has pushed people, myself included, but so many others, even UNHCR refugees, organized to do a lot of the cleanup as well. It's quite remarkable seeing. But you know, I was born in Beirut. My mother is Lebanese Syrian. I was born in 1983, and we left 2 years later, and we ended up in Paris, then London, where I grew up. All these Lebanese immigrants, myself included, our families took with us parts of Lebanon. And even though I never went back to live there, it's still so much a part of our household.
The pop star Mika. The main news this hour, the Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny, who's in a coma with possible poisoning, has appealed to President Putin to let her husband be flown abroad for treatment. Thanks for listening to the newsroom. Next, record-breaking temperatures, and then it's News Hour with James Menendez.
Joe Biden promises to end Donald Trump's season of darkness as he accepts his party's nomination. But what exactly is he offering instead? Also, doctors treating the Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny say he's too sick to be moved to a specialist hospital.
Then we're in the tech tent.
As the schooling in England given the use of algorithms in public life a bad name. Plus, the battle between the makers of Fortnite, Epic Games and Apple moves up a level, and why the internet is buzzing about the latest Microsoft flight simulator.
At 15 GMT, today's guest on Hard Talk is Kishore Mahbubani from the Asia Research Institute in Singapore.
If you look at the economic picture too, the first economy to really bounce back from COVID-19 is China.
That's all still to come here on the BBC World Service. Now, here's Roland Pease.
You're with the BBC World Service. On today's Science in Action, we are hearing about the dramatic effect changes in Arctic climate can have on conditions around the rest of the world. The data come from long ago, but they're still relevant.
We need to understand what happened in our past to understand how Earth's climate system operates and how unstable the climate can be and how very interconnected it is.
We'll have the full story after this.
BBC News with Gareth Barlow. The wife of Alexei Navalny has called on President Putin to allow the Russian opposition activist to be transported to Germany for treatment. Mr. Navalny is in a coma. His supporters say he's been intentionally poisoned. A German air ambulance is ready to fly him out, and the doctors on board have now been given access to Mr. Navalny. The Belarusian opposition politician Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has said Belarusians will never accept the current government, led by the long-time autocratic President Alexander Lukashenko. Mrs. Tikhanovskaya, who's in Lithuania, added that the Belarusian people would never forgive the government's recent acts of violence. In Libya, the internationally recognized Government of National Accord has ordered its forces to cease hostilities and said parliamentary and presidential elections should be held in March next year. For its part, the eastern-based parliament, backed by the rebel leader General Khalifa Haftar, will also stop fighting. A 2-week lockdown has been imposed in Lebanon in an attempt to control a major surge in coronavirus infections. The move follows the massive explosion in Beirut's port earlier this month. Poland has recorded the highest daily rise of COVID-19 cases since the beginning of the pandemic. 900 new cases have been diagnosed. Ireland's Agriculture Minister has resigned after attending a large event that contravened government coronavirus guidelines. Dara Kaleri was at a dinner with 80 other people on Wednesday night, only a day after the authorities said that such events shouldn't take place. And the authorities in Somalia's semi-autonomous region of Puntland say they've temporarily detained a Panama flag ship, contradicting earlier reports that it had been hijacked by pirates. The fisheries minister said the ship ran aground. BBC News.
Welcome.